Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Landlords are jerks, generally speaking. Everyone knows that, but if you think residential landlords are bad, they are nothing compared to commercial landlords. Landlords of commercial buildings are some of the cruelest, nastiest people I've ever come across. This revenge tale is about a commercial landlord and how I dealt with him. Back in the 90s, sometimes I'd go for lunch at this restaurant in the basement of our building. The place was called The Vault because it had a massive bank vault that had always been there, dating back to the days before the place was turned into a restaurant. The vault was so huge that they could seat a couple of tables in there, and you could eat dinner surrounded by rows of old gleaming safe deposit boxes. One day, I was there for lunch, and the owner took me aside. "The landlord's driving me nuts," he said. The landlord drives everyone nuts. I was a subtenant in the same building, sharing space with an older lawyer, Aaron, and the landlord was always causing us trouble. I'd already had a few run-ins with him, and we hated each other on sight. In most jurisdictions, commercial landlords don't need court orders to get you out. Instead, they just change the locks and you find out about it when you show up and your key doesn't work. Every time our landlord had a dispute with anyone, which was often, he'd always threaten to change the locks. He keeps demanding all this stuff for extra rent, and it's really weird because a lot of it is really old. The restaurant owner showed me a letter the landlord had served on him earlier that day. I looked over the demand and read a list of expenses for snow removal and parking lot repair and common area flooring and all kinds of crap going back years. I read it all the way to the end, and there it was. The usual clause saying he was going to change the locks if the tenant didn't pay this and do that. From the wording of the demand, it looks like you've been fighting a while. Why didn't you wait before consulting a lawyer? I asked one of the lawyers I know, and he said it's hopeless. He told me the lawyer's name. It was a guy I knew with a crabby real estate practice, who resorted to taking little legal aid cases to keep the lights on when the market tanked in '89. You do something to make the landlord hate you? I asked, because this is a bit over the top even for our jerk landlord. Well, he knows I'm moving the restaurant. I think he's trying to grab as much money as possible before I go. Plus, he's giving me grief over the vault. He won't let you take it with you? Are you kidding? It weighs almost 800 tons, and I don't need it. But the lease says I have to remove it, and then I also have to restore the building to what it was before there was a vault. That will cost a fortune. The jerk landlord says if I leave the vault behind when I move, he will sue. Well, send your lease up to my office and let me look it over. I said. I finished my lunch, and when I got back to my office, the lease was waiting for me. The lease was a renewal of a renewal of an assignment of a renewal. The original documents dating back to shortly after WW2. The original documents dating back to shortly after World War II, when the bank first leased the place and the vault was installed. Somehow the landlord had suckered the restaurant into taking over a lease that left him liable to remove a bank vault at the end of the term. No big deal, I thought. The restaurant can default, and all the landlord can do is sue a shell company. But when I got to the last page of the lease, there was a guarantee clause. The restaurant owner had personally guaranteed the lease, and he was on the hook for removing a vault weighing 100 tons, and then fixing the place up. It would cost a fortune. The case was hopeless, of course. That was obvious right away. But then I thought about the jerk landlord with his demands and his threats and his rent hikes. And I asked my brain to do me a solid, which it promptly did. I picked up the phone and called the restaurant owner. "I'm screwed, right? You're calling me to say that there is no way out." That's what my commercial lawyer already said. But I just thought I'd ask. "Well, I can save you, but it's gonna cost." "How much?" $5,000 in legals and another G note for the agent. "Agent? What kind of agent?" "Real estate. Send up a check, certified, and leave the rest to me." The check hit my desk in less than an hour. I went to Aaron's office. "I need a real estate agent," I said. "You buying a house?" "Nope." "Selling a house?" "Nope." By this point, I've been sharing space with Aaron for almost 5 years, and he knew me pretty well. You pull in one of your stunts again? He asked. Yep, but nothing that will get you in trouble. Well, I know a guy. Aaron knew all kinds of guys, and that's one of the reasons he eventually got disbarred. But he knew a guy and he gave me the agent's name and number, and the next day I paid the agent a visit. I told him what I needed and we agreed to terms. I gave him some papers and a cash for his fee. A few days later I was again at the vault for lunch. The owner saw me walk in and greeted me himself. The landlord is here, he said. Why? For lunch, and to be a jerk. Let's sit in the vault room so I don't have to look at his face. He took me to the vault room and with the door almost completely closed, we had a consultation while we ate pasta and drank red wine. We're making demand on a landlord, I said, munching on spaghetti carbonara. Demand? What are we demanding? I pulled a document out of my briefcase and passed it to him while I sipped my wine. We're demanding that the jerk landlord release all the restaurant equipment, all the fixtures, the ovens, the freezers, the ventilation, everything you need to run a restaurant. The lease exempts all that stuff. He can't stop me taking what I want. The only thing that matters is a vault. And of course, I don't want that. I shook my head. You need the vault, I said. And we're demanding that he release the bank vault as well. We're insisting that he let you take it out within 7 business days. You think you can beat the landlord with reverse psychology? You think if you treat him like a 2-year-old, you can manipulate him into doing what you want? We will find out soon enough. He's had the demand for a couple of days now. The restaurant owner dropped his wine glass and it shattered on a marble floor. You already gave it to him? The restaurant owner said. He got up, swung open the vault door and called for the waiter to clean up the mess. Let's see what the landlord has to say. I told him and we walked over to the landlord's table. And the landlord was a big, beefy man with a big appetite. He sat alone, eating wolfishly and with his hands. My client needs an answer today, I said. The landlord looked up at me as he chewed noisily. I am the vault's lawyer, I said. I gave you a demand the other day. My client needs an answer right now. He needs the vault for a new place, and he's got to make arrangements. Your client can't forget about the bank vault, he said, wiping his massive, greasy hands on an already soiled napkin. But you can't do that, I said. My shock was faint, but the restaurant owner's jaw dropped for real. The landlord laughed at us. I'm a landlord. I can do what I want. Well, I'm going to need that in writing because my client might sue, I said. Sue all you like, the landlord told me. Sue till you're blue in the face. He told me that I'd have a formal response by day's end, and then he told me to go away and let him finish his lunch. When the letter arrived from the landlord claiming ownership over the bank vault, I brought it downstairs and showed it to my client. How the hell did you do that? Great secret, I said. The following months, the restaurant moved out and the place was empty, and that was too bad, because I had always liked eating at the vault. Now the restaurant was in a new location 20 minutes away. They called the new place The Vault, and they preserved the vibe of the old place. It was very similar, except they didn't have the bank vault. The bank vault, all 100 tons of it, was where it had always been, in the basement of the building where I rented space. I showed up for work a little after that and Aaron collared me. The landlord's looking for you, he said. Oh yeah? What about? He's really angry, Aaron said. He said his deal fell through. Deal? He was supposed to rent the place downstairs to a new tenant, a bank or a credit union or something like that. They were supposed to come in to sign a lease, but they didn't show up. What's that got to do with me? I said to Aaron. And I said the same thing again to the landlord when he managed to track me down a couple days later. I know you were behind this, he said, his jowls quivering. I know it was you. That offer from the agent, it was all bullcrap. Just a trick to make me keep the vault, so that your client could sneak out of the place and leave that bank vault behind. I'm gonna sue. Well, if you're looking for counsel, I think I'm going to have to declare a conflict. I'm gonna sue the restaurant and that agent, and I'm gonna sue you. He stormed off. But the landlord didn't sue. Of course he didn't. He didn't have a contract to sue on. Only a vague glitter of intent that I drafted. enough to hook a greedy landlord who was used to having his way. The offer he'd received was non-binding, incapable of acceptance without the signing of a formal lease, which of course never got signed. When I left Aaron's place a year later, the downstairs was still unoccupied, with a sad for rent sign sitting in the window, starting to look faded. Initials for clarity. Me, 24 male, my mother, 50 female, my brother, 23 male, my sister, 30 female, cheating stepdad, 45 male, Chris, stepdad's co-worker, 25 female, Biddy, and the other woman, 40 female, Darla. This may be a long one, so apologies in advance. I moved in with my mom after her marriage of 25 years with my bio dad ended. He was a manipulative jerk, but that's for another story. Shortly after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Chris. Now, my mom works as a correctional officer at the county jail. The boyfriend was a former inmate for a DUI. That should have been the first red flag, but my mom was grieving a long marriage, and I didn't want to push the subject, so Chris seemed to make her happy, and that was enough for me. Me, bro, and sis all moved in with mom and Chris, and we seemed to get along okay. Chris and I bonded a bit over our love of video games, and all seemed well. That is until 2017. Due to Chris's prior DUI, he had to go in regularly for probationary checkups at the courthouse. One day he didn't return and we got a little worried. We then received a phone call from him from Texas. Turns out when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was jumped by the FBI. His family from Texas was implicated in a number of gang and drug-related crimes, and due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was on a hook as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence. He was allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was distraught, and over the course of many phone calls over a year, they worked out their marriage plans when he returned. His store owner at the DQ he worked at allowed him to come back as well, back to his store manager position. Soon after, the drinking started. Now obviously, because of his DUI, Chris was clearly no stranger to drinking. He began to drink more and more to the point where he was consuming half a 24-pack of beer a day. Chris was a mean drunk. He regularly started fights when wasted. And while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress was getting to him from work and from the upcoming trial. Finally, after several years, my mom had enough. Chris came home extremely drunk one night, and my mom confronted him. She asked if he'd been drinking, and when he didn't deny it, she kicked him out. He went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, my mom asked us to help gather a few of his essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Biddy, one of Chris's co-workers and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to share where she got the information from, Biddy told my mom about how Chris was cheating on my mom with Darla, how he regularly had Darla perform inappropriate acts in and around his workplace, how Biddy had caught them, and how Chris told her that if she ever told my mom, he'd fire her. He was a store manager. And finally, how Darla was pregnant. My mom was angry. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Chris's things and to dump it outside. We took everything out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Chris had no reason or ability to return to the house. It was rented with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. She confessed to the entire affair and that he was happy Darla was pregnant because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids. We three were massive strains on her body. She likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions, and my mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley with an officer present, and he lived our lives. The revenge. Now, my mom clearly wanted to dust her hands off him and move on. She was already quite emotional from the whole ordeal. I wanted nothing more from him. But sis, bro, and I had other ideas. First, we called his workplace. DQ operates as an independently owned franchise, and the owner of this branch owned several branches in the area. He was also a good friend. We informed him of the inappropriate acts being performed on a premises, and he went through the processes of getting Chris booted from his position and barred him from any of the branches in the area. Finally, Biddy got his position after he left and now runs a tight and clean ship. Chris no longer had a job or a place to live, and so went to live with Darla in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another DQ in that town and informed the owner of that location of the situation. It took significantly longer due to there being no current indecent actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Chris began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Texas, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI, and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us, since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here he was, clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Darla's vehicle in our neighborhood, and that we believed Chris was driving it, without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they see it, as it would likely be Chris driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later we were told that Chris indeed was pulled over and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license, and while intoxicated. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at, and found several guns at the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Texas for the trial. Chris's son was born while Chris was in prison. Darla evidently realized what an absolute jerk Chris was and cut ties with him while he was in prison. During his prison time, Chris started sending tons of letters to my mom, stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back, and ranting about how it wasn't his fault. All in the same letter, mind you. Mom burned every one of them. We moved on, moving out of the state. Chris evidently got out of prison some years ago and now lives in Kansas, struggling and fighting child support, which Darla sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend who treats her right and cares a lot more than Chris ever did. Bro and sis moved on and out, and I still live with my mom assisting her with a newly purchased home that we've been renovating. Life's looking okay. I was reminded of this by a chat with a co-worker about cheaters, and I thought to post it here for others to enjoy it. My name is Emily, and I'm the mother of two adorable but exhausting kids, Lucas, who is 3, and Mia, just 2 months old. On this particular day, I was driving to their checkup at the pediatrician's office. It was a sunny afternoon and I was in no particular rush. Driving within the speed limit, trying to keep my newborn calm, my toddler entertained. As we cruised down the main road, which was lined with shops and always busy, I noticed the car close behind me in my rearview mirror. It was a sleek black SUV and it seemed like the driver was in a hurry, swerving a bit as if trying to find a way past me. But with the traffic as it was, there was nowhere to go. I kept my pace, adhering to the speed limit, focusing on the safety of my kids. At the next traffic light, things took a turn for the worse. The light turned red and I stopped, and that's when I heard a car door slam. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her. Let's call her Karen. She stormed out of her SUV and marched up to my car. "Move your car, you idiot! You're driving like a grandma!" Karen screamed, pounding on my window so hard I thought it might shatter. My toddler Lucas started crying, scared by the loud noises and the angry stranger. I tried my best to calm him, but Karen wasn't done yet. She walked to the side of my car and, in a fit of anger, smashed my side mirror. Just ripped it right off and threw it on the ground. Then, as suddenly as she erupted, she stormed back to her SUV. The light turned green and she sped off, swerving dangerously into the lane in front of me. But it didn't end there. After cutting me off, she started brake checking me aggressively, slamming on her brakes with no warning. I did my best to maintain a safe distance, but eventually her erratic driving led to the inevitable. My car stabbed the back of her SUV. Karen was out of her car in a flash, yelling even louder this time. "Look what you did to my car! You wrecked it! I am calling the cops and you're going to jail." She was theatrical, playing the victim as she dialed 911. I was shaken but kept my composure for my kids. As we waited for the police, I remembered my husband's insistence on installing dashcams. Thank God for that. Not only did the cameras capture her reckless driving and brake checking, but also the initial encounter where she vandalized my car. I even managed to catch her smashing my side mirror on my phone. When the police arrived, Karen put on a show. "Officer, this woman harassed me on the road and hit my car from behind. She's dangerous." I calmly explained the situation to the officers and showed them the dashcam footage, as well as a video of her vandalizing my vehicle. Karen's face went from angry red to pale white as the officers watched the videos. After reviewing everything, the officers turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for reckless driving, destruction of property, and endangering children." Karen was in disbelief, sputtering about how this was impossible, how she was a victim, but the evidence was undeniable. She was handcuffed and taken away, still shouting about how she would have her revenge. As for me and the kids, we were a bit shaken up, but thankfully we were unharmed physically. The officers were incredibly supportive, assuring me that I did everything right by staying calm and collecting evidence. So yeah, that is my story. It's a reminder that no matter how entitled someone might feel, they'll eventually come face to face with karma at one point, especially when caught on camera. And to all the parents out there, keep those dash cams running. You never know when you'll need them. Hope you found this story as crazy as I did living it. Stay safe out there and keep an eye out for those Karens on the road. Let's call him Joe. I have to call him something, the man I ruined, but I can't call him by his real name, so let's call him Joe. Joe was a wife beater. I was hired by Joe's brother-in-law, the brother of the wife that Joe beat. My client was also Joe's ex-business partner. Aside from the whole "you beat up my sister" thing, my client had another beef with Joe. A serious business beef. My client took it to court and gave me the case to handle. Joe and his lawyers fought me long and hard. Joe was confident that his bullcrap and outright perjury would carry the day. It had always worked before. His nonsense and his fists had won him a good settlement with his ex-wife, free of child support, so maybe he thought that threats and lies would carry the day once more. But he was wrong. And after the trial, I had a judgment against him. A big judgment, far bigger than he could pay. Joe twisted and he turned and he shimmied and shaked. But after a while, I'd located and taken all his assets. It was easy, really. Joe had no thought of consequences, and so he didn't lawyer up until it was too late. If one of my clients ever sues you, you're in trouble because my clients lawyer up before they even know your name. But Joe didn't lawyer up until the process server threw the papers at his feet. And by then, it was far too late. I went through Joe's assets like a meat grinder. And after a while, Joe had but one property left, a house, and he clung to that house for it was rented out and his sole source of income. I went through Joe's assets like a meat grinder, and after a while, Joe had but one property left, a house, and he clung to that house for it was rented out and his sole source of income. Joe lived in the unfinished basement and he survived on what the upstairs tenants paid him. He cashed her rent checks at payday loan places, paying hefty fees, but it was worth it because he knew that I'd garnish any bank account that he opened. Joe managed to hide his rental place from me for a while because he owned it through a numbered company. But my investigator found him one day and followed him home. Joe self-ripped his way through the next stage, which took a couple of years while I punctured his corporate veils and his sad efforts at a fraudulent conveyance. But in the end, I had his last house, the house where he lived in the unfinished basement. Joe stepped out one day to get a pack of cigarettes, and when he came back, the sheriff had changed the locks. "Can my client at least live in the basement?" Joe's lawyer said to me, pro bono, because by this point Joe had nothing to pay lawyers. I knew the pro bono guy. He practiced law nearby. As I was talking to him, I could see pro bono guy's office window across the parking lot from my office tower window. I said, as the purchaser. It's out of my hands. And it was. I told Joe's lawyer that the new owner, a nominee, one of my client's employees, wouldn't let him back into his crabby basement apartment. Joe, a man who had owned this and that here and there and all over town, had just lost the last thing he owned on earth. Except for his truck. He still had his truck left. Joe's truck was this big gas-guzzling beast that he drove around in. It was too old and too frail to be worth seizing, so I let Joe keep it. And I was glad I did that because now the truck was where Joe slept. Until he made a mistake and lost his truck too. He lost his truck the day I got a phone call from the tenants at the house that Joe used to own. He came back and parked his truck across the driveway. The tenant said, adding that Joe had gone nuts. He parked his truck there in a rage out of spite and then walked into town, saying he'd be back later that day to sleep in his truck. Can you get around the truck? I asked. The tenant could not. The driveway was blocked. I called one of the tow truck guys that I used to defend back in my criminal lawyer days, and in a couple of hours that truck was gone and parked somewhere else, somewhere special, in accordance with my specific instructions. My guy wants his truck back, the pro bono lawyer said the next day when he called me. Not happening, I said that. I stood in my office 15 floors above the parking lot and looked down where I imagined my pro bono counterpart was standing in his office facing the same lot. But you have no right to the truck, he said that. He has no right to block a man's driveway. I replied, it was terrible. Really, standing up high, pronouncing words that took away a man's final asset, the last thing he owned on earth. Are you really gonna make me go to court over this? Said pro bono guy. Do what you gotta do, I said. And pro bono guy said his client was coming in the next day to sign an affidavit. And then they were going to court to get the truck back. But I was unconcerned. The next day was bright and the sun was shining and it was 9 a.m. as I looked out the window and sipped my coffee. My phone rang, I picked it up, and it was a pro bono man. Why didn't you tell me that Joe's truck was parked right outside my office? His voice was tight and I could tell that he must have been shaking with anger. Is that so? I said that, staring out at Joe's truck parked 15 stories below me. How careless of my bailiff to leave the truck where your client could easily take it back. I really must speak to him. Very funny. My client's going to sue. No, he isn't. He's going to get in that truck and drive away right now. I told my tow guy to fill up the tank, and he gave it an oil change too. Grats. Tell your client to get in his truck and drive off, and that if I ever see that truck again, I'll seize it. To satisfy the rest of my client's judgment. Pro bono guy tried to argue, but I was firm. Then I put the phone down and picked up my coffee. A few minutes later, Joe walked out of his lawyer's office and over to his truck. As he walked, I saw that there was no longer a bounce to his step. The joy had gone out of him. Joe wasn't the first guy I ruined, and he won't be the last. But he is the only one whose final ruin I witnessed from on high, from my office, and it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life, watching a man walk to his truck, knowing that I had stripped him of everything else he had, and that he owed his possession of his last asset, his truck, to my mercy. Joe drove away, his big ancient truck spilling clouds of smoke from the exhaust. I was pretty sure I'd never hear from him again, and I never did. I used to sell cars. The dealership I worked at had a policy of being honest, honoring our word, and not advertising crap. This was both a blessing and a curse. Because our competitors didn't abide by the same rules, and if you spent a split second to look at our reviews compared to our competitor reviews, you'd see that. So I was working a deal on a truck at the time for a customer, and it had the Conquest rebate of $1,500. We were at like roughly $40,000. The customer I was working with qualified for that Conquest rebate. However, before I closed him, he was browsing on his phone and he saw a competing dealer offering a very similar F-150 for $35,000. Now, our offer to him was basically invoice minus rebate. I knew this dealership was lying on several fronts, and I explained that. How the dealer got to the $35,000 price was. They didn't include freight or prep in any other advertising. They had small print saying this. They stacked rebates that weren't stackable. They included every single condition or rebate possible. Again, you won't qualify for those rebates. They had mandatory add-ons such as VIN etching, nitrogen in tires, and tinting that they didn't tell you about until you got there. Also, they charged a lot for those options. I also knew the general manager at this dealership never did invoice deals, ever. I tried to explain this to my customer, and of course, he didn't believe me because I'm a car salesman and no one should trust a salesman. I then explained to him it's close to closing. I know what the inventory on his vehicle looks like, and it's really unlikely the conquest rebate of $1,500 will be available come tomorrow. He said he's going to go to them and get a better deal since we refused to beat their offer. We couldn't. If we would have matched their offer, we'd be losing our business. I told him the price we offered is off the table the second we close up shop for the night, and tomorrow the deal could be completely different. And he goes there. The next afternoon he comes back fuming pissed. He asks me, "Can you believe they wanted to charge me freight and prep?" Well, yes I can. Can you believe they included rebates I didn't qualify for? Yes I can. Can you believe they included rebates that cannot be combined? Yes I can. Can you believe they wanted to charge me thousands and thousands of dollars for crap add-ons? Yes I can. I asked him what price they finally came to, and he said $42,500. And I asked him if he bought the truck. He said, "No way in hell was I going to pay $2,500 for the same damn truck that I can get from you." I smiled and I said, "So you want the truck?" He goes, "Yes, let's just get this over with." I said, "Well, unfortunately the conquest rebate didn't get renewed, so your new price is $41,500. He stares blankly at me and said, "Are you freaking kidding?" And I go, "Nope, here, I can show you." So I showed him the list of rebates from the month prior and the expiration date on those rebates, which was yesterday. And then I showed him the new list of rebates, which clearly showed no conquest rebate. He looks at me and goes, "Look, if you don't honor the price you gave me yesterday, I'm just going back to the other place." I explain, well, every dealer has access to the exact same rebates. They also don't have the conquest rebate anymore, so if yesterday their price was $42,500, today their price is going to be $44,000. He huffs and puffs but buys. Before I get yelled at for being sleazy, rebates are not money from our dealership. Rebates are money directly from the factory. If the factory decides to stop offering a rebate, I have zero control over that. Also, even though he paid more, my commission stayed the same because our offer was the same. Invoice minus rebates. It's just less rebates. I have a German Shepherd dog for security. For that, we intentionally did not socialize outside of family members so he wouldn't be friendly with people. He does his job extremely well to the point that some teen boys have made it their weekend hobby to see if they can piss him off, to the point he jumps the fence to attack them. He knows not to go out the gate unless I'm with him. He won't even follow my husband out the gate or go through the gate when we are bringing cars in and out. The only time he leaves the gate is if I'm going to check the mail, then he has his body pressed against mine the entire time. Well, today I went out to check the mail and these turds come flying down the road on dirt bikes. One has a big grin on his face and swerves into my driveway, almost hitting me. My dog does something I've only seen him do one other time. He lunges for this kid. Every hair on his body is on end. Teeth bared and almost pulled me over because I had grabbed his collar when I heard the dirt bikes, but sat once he realized I had hold of him. This kid turns around and screams at me, "What the hell, you psycho witch? Your mutt almost bit me." My dog is extremely well trained, but I'm not. And I'm not letting some little brag get away with this. I clenched the collar. First off, you almost hit me on my property. Second, I think he deserves to get several bites in on each of you like first, since you've spent every weekend since we got here taunting him. And third, if I ever see you near my fence again, I will be calling the sheriff and reporting you for animal cruelty and provoking an attack. Not my proudest moment, but I'm not one to mess around with my safety, especially since I have an 18-month-old that I usually take out with me, but she was napping today. This kid retorts, I'll just give the worthless mongrel some antifreeze tonight. That's where I drop the collar, and boy, was he lucky my dog won't leave my side. Because every hair goes back on end, and he's barking, growling, and snapping at this kid without getting any closer to him. His friends all take off, but this one brat isn't backing down, so I call the sheriff department and explain the situation. As soon as I give them my address, I hear in the background, "Have her put a call on speaker." It was the kid's mom, so I do. The kid goes ghost white as she lays into him. Apparently, this wasn't his first time taunting and threatening animals, and he has a record a mile long for other offenses. I am basically standing there with my still PO dog, being the entire reason for a tongue lashing of a teen by his mother because I inadvertently called her at work. This kid goes home after, like he had been physically injured, and I go get my mail, dog still at my side, and 2 hours later, a sheriff's car pulls into my driveway and honks. It's the mother. I now have her personal number. If I ever have any more problems with the teen boys of the area, I am to call her directly and she will inform the parents of each kid that they need to educate their sons on how to behave in a civilized society. The only other time my dog behaved that way he did today was when we first moved to the area after 4 years in the military. My stepbrothers had been told not to go near him because he was aggressive and didn't like strangers if my husband or I wasn't there for an introduction, and both ignored the warning and came up to him in tandem when he was asleep in my mom's yard.